If Pete Alonso signs elsewhere in free agency, how will the New York Mets replace him in the infield? We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, we all know one of the biggest storylines this offseason is Pete Alonso's free agency. Will the New York Mets re-sign him, or will they let him walk? If they choose the latter, how are they going to replace his production at first base? If they stay completely internal, don't get any other additions, we know the move. You slide Mark Vientos from third base to first base, and then you got a competition at third with Brett Baty, Ronnie Mauricio. Maybe you try Luis Angel Acuna at third base as a shortstop. He probably could handle the position. Other than that, you're really out of internal options. You could move Jeff McNeil to third base, but that's clearly not his best position. I don't believe he's even played much more than an inning there since, on a consistent basis. I feel like it was 2020 the last time we saw Jeff McNeil actually playing some third. Overall, he's more considered a second baseman, outfielder. You could sign Jose Iglesias back, not necessarily internal. He is a free agent, but obviously he really ingratiated himself with the organization and the fan base. I think that would be sort of plan B, plan C, whatever you want to call it, where the Mets just decide, all right, we're going to put Vientos at first. He's going to be our future, long-term answer at that position. We believe in Brett Baty. He's going to be our guy at third, but you want to protect him a little bit against left-handed pitching. Jose Iglesias, you re-sign him as your backup utility infielder who could platoon with Baty at third. Mauricio is coming off a torn ACL. We've talked about this. As far as I know, he still has yet to resume baseball activities. By the time he gets to spring training, he might get some winter league action, which is ironically where he hurt his knee, but the Mets might want to just get him on the field to have him play some games before spring training. That would be the first action he has seen. And seeing big league pitching, that's going to be well over a year by the time he actually gets on the field in spring training. I think it's going to be a very, very tough ask to expect Ronnie Mauricio to be your starting third baseman on opening day, but he could be part of the competition with Baty, with Acuna. You sign Iglesias. The only way where I feel like you stay completely internal and you don't replace via trade or free agency Pete Alonso's production is if you have signed Juan Soto. In that case, your offense is a lot more stacked. You spent a lot of money, clearly, if you were able to land Soto, and maybe that's where you try to save some bucks. And maybe the Mets really do believe that much in Brett Baty. But if you are not a Brett Baty truther, and I'll be honest, I have been, and even with that, I would be disappointed if they went into next season just having full faith that Brett Baty and Mark Vientos are going to be the answers at the corners. Because while Vientos was amazing this year, even that's not a sure thing that he's going to repeat in his second full season. I believe it. I have very little doubts left in Mark Vientos. And again, I do have some faith in Baty, but I would at least get a stopgap. And that's what we're going to talk about, in the next segment as we look at some free agent options. Now I want to run through real quick before we get to what I deem as realistic free agent options, some unrealistic free agent options. So when it comes to first base, I don't think there is an unrealistic free agent option, but there is an unrealistic trade target. At some point this offseason, SNY or some other outlet, maybe it's Bleacher Report, somebody is going to write an article about why the New York Mets should trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to be their first baseman. Not going to happen for multiple reasons. One, if you want Vladdy to be your long-term first baseman, He's a year away from free agency. Why trade significant capital to get him now when you can just wait it out? Another reason, I don't think the Blue Jays want to trade Vladdy. I still think they might want to build around him. Not sure if they're going to try to extend him or not, but I just cannot see them getting that guy to play first base next year. We'll talk about it in 2026. Now, he has a teammate who could theoretically move from shortstop to third, who has a chance to be a high-impact bat. That's Bo Bichette, but Bo Bichette probably wants to play shortstop this year. I don't know if you want to trade for a guy that's going to be upset to move off of short to play third base before he hits free agency, and he's coming off a really bad year. So I look at those two guys. Yes, they have a ton of talent. If anything, I think they are trade deadline options. Let's say you went into the year with Baty and Vientos, and it just didn't work. And Brett Baty just could not hit. So at the deadline, all of a sudden, the Blue Jays are out of it. Those guys are available. Maybe then you could pull the trigger on a trade. And if Bo Bichette had a great year at shortstop and he has to move over to third for the final couple months of the season, that's a lot easier of a sell for a impending free agent. Now, free agent options at third base, because again, we'll get to the ones in the next segment that are realistic at first base. Alex Bregman, to me, is unrealistic for the New York Mets. The reason I say that, he'll be 31 next season. He's a year older than Pete. Represented by Scott Boras, and I think he has every chance to get at least a 6-year deal, maybe even a 7-year deal, because he is by far the best third baseman on the market. I don't know why you would spend on Bregman instead of Pete Alonso when Pete Alonso has so much equity built up with your franchise, your fan base. He's going to be the franchise leader in home runs if he spends one more season with the Mets. I just, to me, is a lateral move, and it doesn't make sense to move on from Pete for Bregman to then just slide Vientos to first. I don't really buy that as a viable option, or one that makes a ton of sense to me as a clear upgrade. The other one that I think is unrealistic is Willy Adames. You could say, all right, move Willy Adames from shortstop to third. He could probably handle that position. But why would Willy Adames, as the only real starting shortstop available on the market, choose to move off the position when he could maybe go join the champions and play shortstop for the Dodgers, who are already rumored to have a lot of interest in him? That one doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. So with all of that said, I believe that the New York Mets ultimately should re-sign Pete Alonso. But if they are going to let him walk, I think the main reason for that would be because they had signed Juan Soto. So not just under that lens, but that is sort of part of this exercise. We're going to look at some realistic stopgap options potentially in free agency. One guy that would be just a straight replacement who could man the position for the next 3 years. And then in the final segment, we'll close on some trade targets. But first, before we get into the free agents who could be of interest to the Mets, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So make sure you win that bet. Maybe you look at the NFL slate, you see what is the most obvious, overwhelming matchup where a team is just absolutely going to win, or the same thing with the NBA. You throw $5 on the money line to make sure that you're going to win that $150 in bonus bets with that win. $5 bet, you win that $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, reliable play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you're going to get started with that $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. Also, you get inside access to content for the show. Spirit of honesty here, I'm recording this on Sunday night because I got a bachelor party I'm going to this week. So recording this episode a little bit ahead of time. The Locked On Mets insiders will get these candidates with some of my analysis on who I like the most on Sunday. So they're going to get this early when it comes to some of that content. If you want to be one of the Locked On Mets insiders, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about the realistic free agent targets. And there's one that's going to jump atop the list, and a guy that we'll probably spend some full shows on if the Mets express interest or otherwise later this offseason. He's the clear second best first baseman on the market, and that is Christian Walker. Over the last 5 years, Christian Walker has eclipsed 25 home runs 4 times, 80 RBIs 3 times. He's a career 250 hitter, 330 on base, 463 slash line. That's a career OPS when you look at his on base plus his slugging of 793. But over the last 3 years, his OPS has been over 800. He is going to turn 34 next season. This is a guy that got a late start to his career. Probably not going to get a 5-year deal. I think you're looking at 3 years most likely. 4 years, probably the best he can do. Probably ends up somewhere close to $20 million a year. If I had to do my projection on this contract, I think I would say 3 years, $65 million. I think that's right around the range you're talking about here. And if you're looking at what he's done over the last 3 years specifically, in 2022, he hit 36 home runs, drove in 94. In 2023, he hit 33 home runs, drove in 103. This year, he was trending towards very similar numbers, 26 homers, 84 RBIs overall, but he missed a month with an oblique strain and really didn't come back the same after it. Really tough for a guy to go through that. The Diamondbacks were in a playoff push, so probably rushed himself back a little bit and just never quite got right again. But this is a guy who is a 30-90 guy. I think it's pretty fair to say that. OPS over 100 and also a great defensive first baseman. Not just a good defensive first baseman, a great defensive first baseman. On the short list of the best first baseman in baseball, he might be the best defensive first baseman in baseball. So if you were to sign Christian Walker, you're going to upgrade defensively at first base. Now, that's not a position where that moves the needle an absolute ton, but if you got a weaker link defensively at third with Mark Vientos, Christian Walker is a really nice fit on the other side of the infield. I think for 2025, he would be an unbelievable fit. I don't think that you would drop off a cliff from Pete Alonso to Christian Walker. Do I think Pete Alonso is still the more productive run producer? Is Pete Alonso the type of hitter that still might have a 50 home run season in him potentially if everything breaks right, signed to the new contract, all the stress melts away? We saw the impact that Pete could have in the playoffs. I still am a Pete Alonso believer. I still believe he is a better free agent fit than Christian Walker, but you're talking about maybe half the commitment when it comes to years if he signs a 3-year deal. Now, with that said, Pete Alonso entering his age 30 season, you'd be paying for pretty much the same years. You're still paying for age 34 through 36. You're just getting him right now, and you've watched Christian Walker at age 33 perform, and you believe he's going to be able to do that for the next 3 years. You don't know how Pete Alonso is going to age, but honestly, for a guy that has rarely missed time, I think Pete Alonso is going to be very close to what he has been the last couple of years when he is at the latter stage of a 5-year deal. Maybe it's a 6-year deal. If it gets beyond 6 years, I get saying goodbye to Pete Alonso. Personally, I would not sign Christian Walker over Pete, but if Pete signs elsewhere and maybe you were left holding the bag because you were down the road with Juan Soto and Juan Soto signed somewhere else too, and now you're left with nothing, Christian Walker, a good pivot point. I think he is a realistic free agent target, and you never know. Maybe the Mets front office that prioritizes defense values Christian Walker more on the contract that he'll get compared to Pete Alonso, depending on his market. So you can't talk about replacements for Pete Alonso without addressing the second best guy in the market, and that's clearly Christian Walker. Other free agent fits. A lot of old dudes. Carlos Santana will turn 39 next April. With that said, he still walks over 10% of the time, doesn't strike out that much at all, 16% the last couple of years, drives and runs, still hits some homers, 23 home runs in each of the last 2 seasons. He's still a good hitter, and he's a solid vet. Not going to be a great defensive first baseman. He's not going to kill you over there either. Carlos Santana is the absolute poster boy for stopgap. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think he'll come cheaper potentially than Paul Goldschmidt. That's the other guy to talk about. And the production might be very similar. So Carlos Santana, let's just say you do sign Juan Soto. and you're going to keep Vientos at third base. You still have Baty, you have his other options. Hey, if everything works out and Brett Baty shows up to spring and he's unbelievable, and you have a good problem on your hands, and maybe Carlos Santana is DHing, you decide to slide Vientos over to first base. Like, you have these options at your disposal that you could go with. It doesn't really preclude you from anything. If you sign Santana to a 1-year deal, it's not going to get more than that. It's not a bad fit. It's really not. Paul Goldschmidt concerns me a little bit because there was definitely some decline in his game. With that said, he pretty much put up similar production to Carlos Santana. He hit 245, 302 on base, 414 slug. So you put together that OPS, not great, 716, but he did hit 22 homers. He did drive in 65. He still stole 11 bases. He was declining defensively for sure, but I don't think he's going to kill you there either. He just turned 37 years old. You look at what he did in the second half, though. He hit 271, got on base at a 319 clip, slugged at a 480 clip. So he really did improve down the stretch to post a 799 OPS in the second half. Hit 9 home runs in the second half, 19 doubles, 1 triple, so 29 extra base hits. In the first half, he had 27 extra base hits in 30 more games. So he clearly came on strong, showed you that there is something left in the tank. This is a guy that's probably fringe Hall of Famer. Definitely someone who have some debates about it when his career ends. Multiple, Gold Glover in the past, Silver Slugger, MVP in 2022. He has definitely declined year over year, and that's why I'd be very concerned because his first half was really bad this year. And going to New York City, he's never played in a big market. Talking about a guy that's been Arizona and St. Louis, the 2 teams that he's played for. So there'd be a lot of risk in that, in my opinion. But as long as it's a 1-year deal as a stopgap, I would not hate it. Anthony Rizzo, I kind of would hate it. I mean, he's a great dude, but how much is he going to stay on the field? Kind of seems like he lost all of his power. He did hit for a high average in the playoffs, but that power was gone. So are you talking about a guy that's, 720 OPS, best case scenario with 13 home runs? To me, I'd rather just give Brett Baty a wide open pathway. You have Mauricio as the fallback. There's other options. I just would not invest in Anthony Rizzo, but he is a name to mention. Ty France is another. Justin Turner's another. Josh Bell. These are all guys that you can sign for 1-year deals that probably don't break the bank. You bring them into camp, you see what you have. I just don't love any of them. I mean, if the Mets sign one of these guys, I would hope it's because they have significantly improved their outfield offensively and maybe even their DH spot. And it's just like a higher end version of what you brought into camp last year with G-Man Choi. It's a guaranteed major league contract, not a minor league deal. Guys that have better success in the past, but I wouldn't expect too much from any of those guys. So ultimately, in free agency, if you don't sign Pete Alonso, Christian Walker to me is the clear-cut replacement. If not Christian Walker, I could be talked into Carlos Santana or Paul Goldschmidt on a 1-year deal as that stopgap. But there might be some better options on the trade market, and that's where we're going to close the show in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by HIMSHims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to the doctor's office to get treatment for ED. Through HIMSHims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMSHims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. HIMSHims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints, Viagra, and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor's visits. You answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with the healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 15,000 subscribers by the end of the offseason. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, let's talk about trade targets. I got two main ones that jump out to me. The first one is Yandy Diaz from the Tampa Bay Rays. He'll be 33 years old for most of next year, due $10 million in 2024, $12 million on a club option in 2025 with no buyout. That contract has me a lot more interested in Yandy Diaz than I would have expected before I realized what the numbers are. Again, if you end up signing Juan Soto and you aggressively add to fill out your pitching staff, you can look at Yandy Diaz as a player that the Rays will be looking to move in his final year of club control. That is when they trade guys making a decent chunk of change at $10 million. They might want to move on, and he might not cost a ton to get him. He's not going to replace Pete Alonso's power production, but he is going to give you a pretty high batting average, chance that he gets on base at a really good clip. He had 2 consecutive years in 2022 and 2023 where he got on base at a 400 clip. He hit 296 in 2022 with a 401 on base. 2023, his career year, he hit 330, 410 on base, 522 slug, had 22 homers, 35 doubles, drove in 78 runs. And when it comes to Fangraphs wins above replacement, he was a 5-win player at first base, and you do not see a lot of those. So I look at Yandy Diaz, who also could play third base at a pinch if you needed him to. He's an interesting option, but he's coming off a bit of a down year, similar to Paul Goldschmidt, a bad first half. Overall, he hit 281, 341 on base, 414 slug, 14 homers, 65 RBIs, 120 WRC plus. That's weighted runs created plus. Better hitters on a league average of 100, so 120, about 20 points better than league average. The OPS in the first half was 726. In the second half, it was 816. So if you get that 816 OPS, he hit 297 in the second half with a 366 on base. If you get that next year, I mean, that's great production. You have an affordable club option you could pick up if you really did hit well, fit well in your clubhouse. $12 million for the New York Mets is nothing for 2026. So I look at this guy, and I think he's not going to set the world on fire. He's not going to hit 40 home runs and drive in 100 like Pete Alonso. But could he hit 20, drive in 75, get on base at a great clip, hit for a high batting average? Yes. So I like Yandy Diaz. I don't think that it's going to kill you on the prospect side of things either. So he does make some sense. But the first baseman that I think the Mets should target if they go the trade route is Josh Naylor, who will turn 28 years old in June. He's in his final year of arbitration with the Cleveland Guardians, so they're probably going to move him. He's going to make a big bump in his arbitration this year because he's coming off a career year. Last year, he's in the $6 million range. Next year, he's projected at $14 million. So again, that's a little bit rich for the Guardians. He hit 31 home runs. He drove in 108 this past year. In 2023, he only hit 17 homers, but he drove in 97 in 121 games. I think that power is legit. I think him being a run producer is legit. He could honestly match Pete Alonso's production or close to it for 1 year in a contract year. He's also got a big personality. I feel like he would revel the big stage in New York. You don't know until you see it, but I really could imagine that fit where Josh Naylor is just this run producing, ignitable spark plug in the middle of your lineup. Lefty pop too, so that's always nice. I think Josh Naylor would be an awesome trade target for the New York Mets. Arguably my favorite Pete Alonso replacement, just because I feel like the top end production is so high. You know, Christian Walker was in the midst of a career this year, and he might have gotten a 35 and 100 if he had been healthy the whole way through. Josh Naylor in a contract year, could he hit 40? I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that this guy at 28 years old, start the season at 27, I think it's like 28 in June. I mean, he's right in the thick of his prime, and I feel like he figured some stuff out the last couple of years, how to be a run producer, how to be consistent. Played 150-plus games this year, then played into October. I just feel like Josh Naylor is the type of guy that can really show out in a contract year. And I feel like the fans would absolutely love this guy. So to me, if you have to replace Pete Alonso this offseason, the top free agent target would be Christian Walker, although I'm a little hesitant still about a 3-year deal for the guy that's already in his mid-30s. Like if you're wary about giving Pete 6 years, and it basically lines up with where Christian Walker is at right now, as far as the final 3 years of Pete's deal or what you'd be paying for Christian Walker at this moment, a guy that has only had success in Arizona. I just wonder, I could see that turning into an albatross and a lot quicker than Pete would potentially turn into an albatross. I still believe that Pete wouldn't turn into an albatross, but again, that's probably a conversation for another day. When it comes to the stopgap options, Carlos Santana and Paul Goldschmidt are the best of the bunch for me. If they signed the Josh Bell and it was a 1-year, $5 million deal and he's part of a whole group of people competing for playing time, I wouldn't hate it, but I certainly wouldn't like it either. And then on the trade front, if they got Yandy Diaz, I'd be all in for it just because I think he's not going to hurt you in any way. He's going to be a consistent at bat for you. If he's not, if he can't perform in New York, you're, able to exercise that well, it's a club option. So you don't exercise it. There's no buyout attached. You just wipe your hands clean with him after the season. He makes a lot of sense. To me, Josh Naylor is the highest upside option to potentially come in, have a monster season before he hits free agency, and be someone that is part of the identity of a new Mets team in 2025 that's looking to build off what they did in 2024. I could just see him fitting like a glove in that clubhouse. So that's my rundown of all the potential options when it comes to the corner infield market, third base and first base, to replace Pete Alonso. I don't see a lot of viable options at third. I did a show last week about Nolan Arenado and his fit with the Mets. I didn't really love that, but it just was more of a show to illustrate the fact that he could be available, but also the lack of other options at third base that make Nolan Arenado one of the more attractive options, yet I still don't love it. So to me, I'm fully on board with the Mets just re-signing Pete. If they don't, I think I'm almost okay with them staying eternal, assuming that the reason they didn't re-sign Pete is because they signed Soto. But if they go that route, whether it's with Soto or not, to stay internal, getting a stopgap at least is probably a good option. It is. So I guess you're not staying internal, but going into next year without Juan Soto, expecting Brett Baty and Mark Vientos to do the job does not feel like a team that just went to the NLCS and was 2 wins away from the World Series. It doesn't feel like a team that is all in to try to get back there, and I just can't see the offseason going that way for the New York Mets. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of the show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be part of our texting service, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for our second watch, or for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.